What you see before you is a triumph of technology. In this relatively modest motherboard, it's a first, and I've got to say, I'm a fan. This is the X570 PG RIPTIDE from ASRock. This is an X570 motherboard. It's designed for AM4 CPUs like the 5950X, the 3950X, the 4700G, the 5750G, those CPUs. That's what we're talking about basically. And this is not a super expensive motherboard. This is actually, middle of the road, I would say. And it's pretty normal if you want to obsess about a motherboard decision. But it's really fancy in one particular way. Or I should say, it's fancy because it lacks a fan. There are people right now that are like, oh my gosh, he got in like 17 fan puns in the beginning and I just now got it. And that's very offensive. Anyway, let's take a quick look at this board. Alright, so X570 that is fanless. This is the first X570 fanless motherboard that I get a chance to take a look at. And I'm very excited by that because a lot of people went B450 initially when the X570 chipset launched because they didn't want a small chipset fan. Now, I've been rocking X570 systems since day one, and the fans have all held up, and most of the fans didn't become weird and whiny. Most of the time it was fine. The fan would activate as you needed it. But now finally, if you're going to rock a quieter build, let's say, you have the option. And it was a weird place before the fanless X570 chipsets launched because a lot of the B550 boards had nicer features than the X570. Generally, a B550 board is going to be a little bit lower cost than an X570, but this is a lower cost X570S motherboard that has better PCI Express 4 connectivity in some ways than the B550 counterparts. I mean, that's the big difference, is that the X570 chipset has a PCI Express 4 link to the CPU, which is twice as fast as PCI Express 3, and also offers PCI Express 4 peripherals hanging off of it. That was the big difference with the B550 chipset, is that a lot of the connectivity off of that chipset was PCI Express 3. That said, the PCIe layout here is definitely more in line with like normal uses for a cost down motherboard, but still offers a lot of connectivity in ways that I think that most people would probably use them. So you have the X16 slot here that is always hardwired into the CPU. It is always PCI Express 4.0 by 16. Then you've got two PCI Express by 1 slots, a PCI Express 16 physical, but it's PCI Express 4 electrical, another PCI Express by 1, and then a PCI Express 16 physical, but it's PCI Express 2 PCI Express 4.0 lanes electrical. So this is really good if you're going to run, say, a PCI Express 4 capture card or PCI Express 4 PCI Express SSD. Maybe you're rocking an old Intel Optane and you want to run a big triple slot GPU. This PCIe layout is perfect for that. You've also got these open-ended slots. So depending on what you're running, you might have a PCI Express 3.0 by 2 card, but if it'll run fine with one lane, you can physically install it in this lane and it'll just stick out a little bit. Now this one is kind of blocked by the coin cell battery, but that's probably going to be blocked by your GPU anyway because your GPU is 2 lanes. So this is a pretty good layout, all things considered. This being PCI Express 4 gives you a lot of flexibility for peripherals. And if you have an add-in sound card or something like that, those are always PCI Express by 1, pretty much. So, you could run that down here, so you could have an X4 peripheral and X1 peripheral. And then you still got 2 lanes here. And you've also got dual PCI Express 4.0 NVMe. This one, of course, connects directly to the chipset. So as far as layout goes, this is not atypical for X570, but this is super nice for X570 in a fanless configuration. X570 actually does have even more PCI Express connectivity than this. You could get even more PCI Express lanes on a higher end board, but I think for most people, you don't need that. An SLI, multiple graphics cards, that's not really a thing anymore either, unless you're looking to do like a VFIO build or something higher end. But even if you wanted to run a 5950X, a 16-core monster in this motherboard, it'd be no problem. Let's take a look at some of the other features. At the rear of the board, we've got our BIOS flashback port. Now this is a little unusual to see on, like the mid-range boards, let's call them. I mean, some have them, some don't. But this means that you can basically put your BIOS on a USB stick, put it in the specified USB slot, hit the button, and the motherboard, without a CPU or anything, can flash the BIOS file from that onto the motherboard. in this way, if AMD comes out with a 5750 XT or some other CPU that hasn't been announced yet, and it requires a BIOS modification, you can upgrade your board without having a CPU, an older CPU, to boot it up. It's sort of a chicken and egg problem. So it's always nice to see that feature. That's something you should look for in general on AM4 motherboards. Also, if your system won't post, it's a really good diagnostic step after you've done everything else, is you put the BIOS, the correct BIOS on a flash disk and flash it and see what happens. We also got the header breakout here for an M.2 Wi-Fi adapter. This particular board does not have the Wi-Fi adapter, which is fine. I don't need Wi-Fi for what I plan to be doing. But you could install the M.2 Wi-Fi down here, run the wires, and then have the antennas nice and accessible at the back without taking up a PCIe expansion slot, which is nice. There is a version of this, of course, with Wi-Fi 6. So if you want to rock Wi-Fi 6 out of the box, you don't want to fool with that, not a problem. Just get that version of the board. It's cheaper anyway. Cheaper than buying it after the fact. Then, of course, we have our single video output and HDMI. If you were thinking about rocking an APU like the 4700G, 4750G, 5000 series G, you've got the one video output. It would work in a pinch, but ASRock has got other motherboards that have better video out options for the APU. So you should consider one of those. Come to Level 1 Forums, I'll try to help you. But if you just need one HDMI output, that'll do it. It is an HDMI 2.1 output. However, you are limited to 4K 60 Hz. Remember Megadisc? Tried this on Megadisc with the LG CX. That's a 4K 120 Hz HDMI 2.1. This is kind of a subset of HDMI 2.1. This is nothing against the motherboard. This is something a little confusing that AMD has done, and they really need to work on, in my opinion, because the HDMI 2.1 should imply 4K 60 Hz, but that is not the case. So, AMD weirdness, just FYI, I guess they figure if you're going for an APU, you don't want 4K 120 Hz, but it will do 4K 60 Hz all day long. And then we have USB. This motherboard has got the USB connectivity in droves. We got two USB 2.0 ports as well as a combo PS2 mouse keyboard port. That's really great if you're rocking the Model M keyboards. Check out that thing. That's the AT Model M. That's 122 keys of awesome, originally designed for an AT keyboard. It's not converted from a mainframe. Insane people like me love to be able to rock a keyboard like that, and with onboard PS2, that keyboard works great on this board. So, nice. Then we have 5 more USB Type A ports. 4 of those are 5 gigabit, 1 of those is 10 gigabit, and then we've got a 10 gigabit USB Type C. Our 2.5 gig LAN here is based around the E3100 Killer NIC. That's Intel and Killer working together, so yeah, 2.5 gig, pretty awesome. Our audio codec here is based around the Realtek ALC 897. Now, while that's not as high-end as the Realtek ALC 1220, for most common things that you would be doing on this motherboard and just regular gaming stuff, it doesn't hurt you. And if it really bothers you that much, you can always get an add-in sound card later. In terms of other connectivity, it has the dual PCI Express 4.0, 4 lanes, M.2 slots, as I mentioned before, but we've also got 6 SATA ports, a total of 4 more 5 gigabit USB 3.0 connections. That's 2 30-pin headers, USB Type-C for the front panel, and 2 USB 2.0 headers. So that's 2 headers, 2 ports each, 4 more USB 2.0 ports. I love this board for USB connectivity. That is fantastic. You know what else is fantastic? The actual fan headers, of which there are 7. The CPU fan header is kind of a dual CPU fan header, but all of them have the water pump labeling, so that'll deliver like 3 amps of power if you do have a 4-pin, water pump that you're wanting to run directly off of the motherboard. This motherboard will do it. Now, memory support. The board advertises up to DDR4 5000. But you're going to be hard-pressed to get that on a 5000 series AMD Ryzen CPU unless it's one of the APUs, like one of the 5000 series APUs, because that's different. The IO die chiplet, it really struggles at, 4,000 mega transfers per second. 3800 is like the top end, and 3600 is still kind of the sweet spot. So this motherboard will do that. I have the memory kits that are tried and true, tried 3600 and 3800, even fully populated, because running 128 gigs is a little challenging. And so using 128 gigs at 3600 is not something that you should expect will work on every single CPU. That is technically an overclock, but this motherboard was able to deliver 3600 stable with the 5950X. Took me like 3 tries, but with the 5950X that I have, that is stable for that. That's also a 5950X that will hit DDR4 4000 with 2 8 gig sticks of memory with really tight timings. I can actually get it to post, and it's mostly stable. I gotta push the voltage a little bit, but mostly stable, works pretty well. 16 gigabytes with a 16 core CPU doesn't make logical sense, but it does make sense for winning those benchmarks. So that's nice. This motherboard will also do that with 2 sticks of memory. Now, in terms of like the 5000 series APUs, I've only got an engineering sample version of those, which is pulled from, I think, HP's, testing line, and it worked fine, and I got at least that fast, but I didn't see anything untoward in terms of the memory speed. Like I say, ASRock says DDR4 5000 plus OC support. I can verify 3600 and 3800. 3600 is a sweet spot. That's what you should go for. So that's not a concern in general. Power delivery is the other thing on this motherboard. Some people will look at this and be like, my God, it can't deliver 400 watts to the CPU. Look, the 5950X, if you give it more than like 180 watts, you're gonna melt the socket. Really, like 140 watts is the sweet spot. ASRock doesn't even really go out of their way. They just say 10-phase power design. The VRM here really is nothing to write home about, but it will drive the 5950X. That's the really awesome thing about what AMD has done with their platform, is that if you get a B550 or an X570, whether you're running the least expensive 4-core, whatever, or the 16-core 5950X monster, the AM4 socket can deliver that with the 500 series chipsets and all of the I's dotted and T's crossed. This board, no exception. All of our testing was done with a PBO 5900X. Well, except for the memory testing, because I needed the memory timings for that. The 5900X on this board, great, lovely, awesome, works super well. In the box, you get one other accessory. This is ASRock's graphics card holder. This is designed to mount on the edge of the motherboard and actually hold your GPU. So this is like a sag bracket, but instead of holding it out here where you can see it in your case, it actually holds it from behind your GPU. This is really, really awesome if you travel with your machine a lot, because it'll hold a big giant GPU. So for big giant GPU testing, yes, I tested the 6900 XT, also from ASRock, the Phantom Gaming. That's what we did our gaming test. And so of course, games like SNK RX are 4 billion frames per second, but in terms of other games with the 6900 XT, this was certainly not holding us back. We were able to get in pretty close to the top 100 in 3D Mark for Time Spy and also Firestrike. So pretty amazing. If you're into RGB, it does have both digital and 50/50 headers at the top and bottom of the board, so you're pretty much covered depending on whatever it is you want to do with RGB. But yeah, pretty good. One other thing that's nice is there's a clear CMOS button way over here at the front edge of the motherboard. Really easy to hit, really away from probably your big add-in cards. So if you have problems, you can hit that clear CMOS button and reset your settings. That's nice if you're overclocking or doing anything else. This is just a little tiny thing that ASRock did that makes a big improvement in terms of the usability of the board. I like that. If you're building a system around this, the only other recommendation I would give you is always populate this M.2 slot first, because that's the one that's wired directly into the CPU, doesn't go through the chipset. But other than that, you really wouldn't go wrong using this board for a build. I mean, the only thing that I might like to improve is the audio solution, but at a board at this price point, I mean, obviously do some comparison shopping and feature analysis and stuff like that. Pricing moves can change the market. But as it is today, the pricing for this board is pretty solid overall. And the ALC 897 audio, really, even in testing, wasn't that bad. The worst thing about the 897 was the record signal-to-noise ratio was on the order of like 98 dB, and on a higher end solution where you're usually around 110 dB, give or take. If that's really a concern for you, like I say, get a sound card, get an add-in sound card, or use a USB headset. Because if you use a USB headset, it moves all of that digitization stuff, or just about all of it, to the actual headset. And then it's much less of a problem for your add-in or your onboard audio. So yeah, PCI Express 4, 16 lanes, 6900X pushing near the top 100. Yeah, it's fine. Oh, Linux support. Linux support's pretty good. Not a board I'd recommend for IOMMU, but if you're building a Linux workstation, the E3100 is pretty well supported on newer Linux distros. So if you're running 20.04 or newer, something with a newer Linux kernel, and you don't mind picking up some firmware files, the ALC audio and the USB peripherals and all of the other onboard stuff with this board will work. Just be prepared to maybe download a firmware or tweak a setting or something like that. This one doesn't have the onboard Wi-Fi, so there's no Wi-Fi to complain about, but Linux support for this board, pretty good. If you did want to do something with IOMMU and you care about the IOMMU separation, well, that information's on screen, so you can take a look at that. I've got the system populated with a bunch of PCI Express by 1 peripherals, so you can see, just remember that you don't have PCI Express 8 lanes. You don't have a by 8 by 8 PCI configuration for, it's just PCI Express by 4 through the chipset, PCI Express, by 2 through the chipset for your physical X16 slot, and the other X16 slot is always hardwired into the CPU. Oh, and in case you're wondering about Windows 11 support, yes, absolutely, Windows 11 support, no problem. Just make sure that you've got the TPM, the AMD Agiza platform TPM turned on, and you'll be all set for Windows 11. So, ASRock actually has published a full list of Windows 11 boards. Almost all of their old ones, pretty much all of their old ones, will support it. You might just have to toggle a setting in the BIOS or update your BIOS, but this is no exception. Windows 11, good to go. I'm gonna this is level 1. This has been a quick X570s PG RIPTIDE fanless X570. That's the big feature. That's why the refresh of X570. I'm This is level 1. I'm signing out. You can find me in the level 1 forums if you have any other questions or anything that I didn't cover.